think it's gonna quit.
How low is this cut?
Oh, I don't know. That's it. Democrats are like, "Whoa,
We got it.
have a shutdown." I'm like, yeah, we can.
Yeah.
But it's, don't think it's gonna happen.
Jim, is John coming too, or this?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, but we were, I looked at it, thought it was 6 on the website on the town.
You're right, the website was in error.
Oh,
Beacon just
okay.
discovered that late this
Well,
afternoon.
he said he was gonna show up early,
Okay.
so.
Give us a
And
second.
Richard
Oh,
said
it's
he'd be
at
here at
5:30?
5:30.
Okay, yeah.
Oh,
Oh, we are expected.
let's go ahead and start with the slide deck, and I would just say, has everybody had a chance to go through the slide deck that they sent us?
What was that?
The finance committee sent us a slide deck.
When did they do
No,
that?
I didn't get it.
I didn't get it.
I guess they didn't send it.
Bob and Vika, 'cause I
That's
didn't-
why I asked, I had this thing in the back of my mind and we had a meeting today.
It's boring anyway.
Well, but I was confused about that.
Now I'm curious.
Everyone says, they say slide
I
deck.
think Herb thought it was 6. So
No,
does the
it's,
finance committee think it's 6 o'clock?
we're what?
Obviously. I think so.
We're planning just to go through a brief.
Herb said 6.
Yeah, so John said I'll get there a little early, so maybe he'll be a quarter up, but it.
Well, should we do something else in the
Is there
mix?
something else to talk about?
I mean, I really, yeah.
I think we can go through, were you planning on presenting the slide deck? Let's go through that. My apologies, I thought I forwarded it to the board, but obviously I did not.
Well,
Well, I
John
think we
is,
should
John is
wait
a
for John.
key. This is well scripted, so John actually is gonna do a lot of
Okay.
talking.
Okay.
Maybe we could do some of the budget before they get here. I mean, I don't wanna do it till the finance committee's here.
Oh, it's just her.
I just texted her.
Yeah, what's up?
Yeah.
What's up?
Why are we
Hey,
here?
Herb, oh, yeah.
And us anyway.
You're not really on the finance committee.
You blame me.
Yeah, might be good.
Somehow it'll all work out.
But,
No, I clearly did not forward it.
well, I think we can do that, John.
It's
but
no fun.
Should we go over something while we're waiting? Because I have a feeling.
Let's start talking, let's go ahead and open the workshop now.
There, yeah, you can,
And
There's no real,
no controversy. So, did everybody get a chance to look at the spreadsheet that I sent out?
Yeah,
That had formulas so we can play games, changing things, and it should recalculate automatically, all that kind of thing.
and this wasn't recent, right?
I thought it was Vika who, I got what Vika said. Is there something else?
I sent out yesterday,
Right.
the
That's all I
PDF
think I.
directly from Trio.
You sent it a couple days ago, and then I resent that spreadsheet to everybody on the board.
I didn't get it.
I got it.
With formulas in place, instead of the Trio output, which just copies numbers. So that if we decide to change a line item, it'll automatically recalculate the totals.
The one I got this morning didn't have those in it.
Yeah.
It just, in the green area, it had formulas, but the rest of it.
So to David Hill, Eliza, Carol, Richard, Vika, Chip, John.
Yeah, I just opened it.
When did you send that?
8:30 this morning.
Yes,
Oh, no, I haven't seen it.
okay, yeah.
Okay. I saw Vika's that she sent yesterday.
So
Yesterday.
if you want to open that up or not, it's your call, but it's simply what Vika sent. But at the bottom of each department, the total number is now a calculation. So if we change a light item, it'll automatically recalculate. And I added a percentage change of the proposed budget versus the prior year budget for each item. And then totaled all the expenses and all the revenues at the bottom of the spreadsheet. And I'm sorry I sent it as late as I did, but I sent it as soon as I had an opportunity to spend an hour or two working on it. While everybody's looking at that, the questions I had made a note of, and then I'll open it up to others to ask questions. Vika, the fire and rescue budget, public safety budget, what's the status of their input to you on that? Do you have everything now that you expect from them, or are you still waiting for more input from them?
I haven't received anything else from them since the last discussion, during the budget presentation. I haven't received anything.
did they indicate at that time that they had more money that they wanted or were going to ask for?
There were line items that needed more attention, that they were gonna provide me more information.
So we don't have that yet?
I don't have it yet.
Okay.
That was a follow-up that I need to do.
Well, okay. And the Cumberland number and the county number, those single
Haven't
expenditures?
received that information yet. That comes from Cumberland County. We usually receive it
Later, yeah.
a little late March, early April.
So those are still plugs, they're close, but not exact, okay. Those were the only questions I had from the budget. The comment I would make is that, as Eliza pointed out, we have not yet decided in a public meeting as a board whether to change any of the numbers in contributions from what was originally input. And we probably at some point need to talk about capital again, now that we have a snapshot of what the school and town budget looks like together with each other. And then back to the contributions piece of things, might be good to wait until next week's select board meeting or after that to have further conversations about the nonprofits, because there's a lot we'll be covering next week about nonprofits. So that's just my 2 cents. Any other questions or comments on the budget from members of the board? Eliza?
So we're waiting to hear from Fire and Rescue, and I just want to express that all employees, including the stipend and position at the cemetery, got cost of living, and I think, why is that not for the fire chief and the administrative assistant?
The administrative assistant does get the cost of living. The fire chief doesn't, because he is a hired volunteer, just like the rest of the fire department. He gets appointed as a chief every year. So historically, it's a position that was considered on a stipend basis, in which case those don't get a cost of living.
And how long has it been that way?
To my knowledge, it's definitely been as long as I've worked for the town. To my knowledge, that's how it's always been.
And when was the last increase for the fire and rescue volunteer
So
positions?
2 budgets ago, the hourly went up to a higher rate, and the fire chief, I believe, received an additional either $5,000 or $10,000 increase on his stipend.
I think that was two budgets ago.
I think when it comes to the stipends and fire department personnel that volunteer
Right.
but then get paid, I think it's getting to that very gray area where their hourly rate is increasing to a more appropriate rate to where an employee would be, and there is a bigger expectation to be compensated for a lot of the services. I think long-term, there will be a discussion about potentially, switching some of these positions to be hired employees, if that's, the direction that the fire department is going in.
But I was only talking about the fire chief, not technically the volunteers, which are the firefighters and the rescue. But I would like to support that, if that's.
To support,
If we could look at increasing maybe the cost of living for that, even though it is a volunteer. Well, I don't know what the mechanism is for.
yeah,
Does that come from when their budget, the budget for that department is submitted, or does it happen at this level?
any or all of the above, but I would ask you to consider your role in that department as you may. Be aware,
I should recuse myself.
at least on the vote, if not the
Yeah,
commentary.
I understand.
Maybe, that's up to you
Oh, I think I should.
and the board to decide.
Yeah.
And did you have other questions or comments?
Not yet. Thank you.
Anybody else? Carol?
I guess one thing that I had asked for early on that I would still like to see is just a list of positions and what the rates are and what, kind of just so we can across the board see what we have, because we've had a lot of people coming and going, and I just kind of don't, I kind of.
That is on my
Yeah, okay.
list of to-dos. I didn't get a chance to do it before I disappeared for far longer than I expected to, so.
And right now, we have, at Public Works, we have what do we have for employees? One half-time?
So currently, as it stands, we have one employee that is a part-time employee, and then we have, Jeff, who, is part-time, that oversees kind of, the department. And then we have another very part-time employee, Billy, who usually helps with floats and or, snow plowing. So
And Tanner's still part-time?
Tanner's the part-time employee. He does come in on as-needed basis, which is great, so he's holding the department up very well, but we do have it advertised. It's very recent, within the last 2 weeks, that we've lost a full-time employee, so we do have it advertised. We do have an interested party in the position that could potentially qualify, but they wouldn't be available until April, so we're kind of hoping that maybe we can get some interest sooner than later. But in the current budget proposed for fiscal year 2026, it is budgeted for 2 full-time employees.
Okay.
And
Based on the employees that we had,
So we could potentially adjust that if we thought it was gonna be 1.5. I mean, is that not including the occasional part-time employee?
It does include the occasional part-time employee, but, that cost is relatively slow
Right.
considering the other employees. I am hopeful that we can get 2 full-time employees.
So your recommendation is not to reduce it to 1.5, 1.5 full-time?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm more of trying to support an increase to 2.
And then I have a question about code enforcement, since I've had a couple questions about that, and there's a substantial increase of almost 10,000. But that, do I remember correctly that the original budget for this year was kind of an estimate, and that this one is actually based on the...
Yes, based on the hours and what the board hired the current code enforcement officer under, that's what calculates for the year.
And I can't quite tell from year to date, is it, I imagine we're getting charged for whatever time gets used, and it could come in under, is that even in this year?
The code enforcement?
Yeah,
We get a bi-weekly timesheet, so it's based on an hourly rate.
so, and is the code enforcement officer basically, using all the time allotted to him?
For the most part, it
Yeah,
stays right within that time
So
frame.
we
There are-
should leave it as is,
Yeah, I would.
okay.
All right.
When looking at what code enforcement officer jobs are out there on Indeed and different places, and is it possible for the code enforcement officer to be here for 2 days, or does it need to stay at the 1 day?
The select board in the hiring process agreed that it would be 1 day on island and 1 day off. So that's how it was agreed upon through the discussion.
Are you suggesting that it should be 2 days on and no days off?
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like there's enough, I hear about it enough with people, but,
It's a personnel discussion.
Yeah.
For the current situation.
Carol?
So to that end, in terms of that position, if we wanted to make some changes, how do we, so to answer Elaz's question, what's the process to discuss that?
Going into the fiscal year 26 budget, so it would be two different things in terms of the overall budget. You as a board can determine what you're anticipating or what you want to propose for the next budget as far as what the average hours are. And so you kind of create the position that you are proposing. And then if that is approved through the process, you work on a personnel level basis with the employee to adapt and see if the current employee is in line with the position that you're creating and kind of go from there.
It's an annual reappointment, so if we decided to, we could, as a board, we could decide to renegotiate
Right.
the terms of
Yeah.
the agreement.
And my recollection was, at least our current CEO was willing to discuss those things, because, and I think we discussed maybe more time on island in the summer.
Yeah, and that's a discussion to have with the current code enforcement
But
officer.
that's a discussion the board has not, I mean, in this case, the board, he works for, I don't ever understand the arrangement with the code guy. He works for you, but we can help define
The way
his.
that it's currently set up, technically the code enforcement officer is, so the select board make the decision for all hiring days. Because it's a town administrator position, which is why, you, as the board, have a contract with the town administrator, and the town administrator oversees everything else, including the code enforcement officer. But that's why you get brought the recommendation, and you kind of, say yes or no on all of the positions across the board. Understanding that, the TA probably plays a bigger role in some of the departmental hiring.
If we wanted to go into detail to talk about options for how to better structure a position, that's something we would do in executive session. If it began to drift into any sort of performance discussion, then the employee would need to have the opportunity to do that. Yeah, Carol?
Just one last question, because I guess everybody's here. So, on the island fellow, do we have money allocated for that yet?
Not yet, no. So that is an anticipated change, which you all received the email. The Shabig did get selected through the Island Institute as a site host for 2 years, full-time. And so we'll have an opportunity to have the fellow work on providing us a proper list of right-of-way to shores and kind of create a plan around that, and as well as work on the town's comprehensive plan. So that's great news, but yes, the number is not in there yet because we were kind of waiting to determine whether we were selected or not. There is some assistance from Liza to try to get housing, so if we are able to secure housing, then the number goes down. And so now that we know, I think probably in the next couple of weeks, I would assume that we would have a better idea of what the next budget would be, but I anticipate that the number would be under $15,000.
And where does that go in the budget?
With something like that, I would create it under kind of the administrative position, but do it as a stipend. So, because we make we make a payment to Island Institute, so we're not paying an hourly rate, we're not doing workers' comp, things like that, so it would be a contracted service payment, so I would add it under administrative.
So now that it's confirmed, I'll be in contact with my housing supplier. Once that's confirmed, then
No, it's great news, it's gonna be, they'll be able to catch the town up on a few things, so that's awesome.
All right, and I think a fourth member of the Finance Committee is walking in as we speak. So to shift over to that presentation, I think Jay's working with you guys too, right? Yeah, he's walking in.
Yeah, he's the third guy. I'm not, Carol said I'm not a Christian body.
Okay. And
Jim Hartling's the fourth member, and I don't know whether he's on YouTube or not.
Oh, no.
He's watching, he wasn't able to make it, we didn't want to try and connect it in.
Right.
Well, Jay, so I would, for those of you who didn't hear, the slide deck was shared with Bob and Vika, and neither one of us thought to share it with the rest of the board. So these guys have not seen the slide deck. Apologies for that, that's my fault. And
So maybe we should buy it?
it's gonna be up there, yeah, so we can sit up there.
On the screen?
Yeah, we just.
Working around, Joe.
Yes.
Sit on the other side of the table. Actually, Carol, if you sat on the other side of the table, then the microphones would still be available.
How old is it?
Okay, that's good, I won't show you.
So that owl's working,
This owl works.
so if we stand here, we're probably okay.
Something's wrong with
Yeah, you're good.
this one here. So,
Which one's not working, Jim? The one back there?
this one next to Carol's not working.
Okay, all right.
I don't know. Never been getting the owl food?
Will you pick up on the standing?
Yeah.
Who was supposed to do that? All right,
Okay, so the finance committee thought it was appropriate to bring you up to speed as to where we are and where we're going. So this is mostly a process update. And as we said earlier, the committee members are Jay, Jim Hartling, Chip, and myself. Carol and Vika and Aaron Townsend are the town representatives.
ex officio.
And we have a very good consultant that's been active with the committee, Herb, and he's helped us a lot, so that's been great. I'll wait for the slide for a minute, maybe, I don't know. I think for efficiency, I think we can walk through this in about 12 minutes.
Good.
And then, so we don't get into the weeds, we'll be done, and then we can
Yeah,
go
hit
with
any
questions,
questions afterwards.
comments,
Yep.
or
Yep.
advice from you guys after that.
Yep,
So we only started 8 weeks ago. We've been focused on understanding the town's capital assets. We started with an asset list that was developed by the auditors at one point in time that had depreciation on it. We translated that depreciation into expected life, and then we associated those assets with the reserve accounts. Okay, and so we're trying to project future replacement costs and the timing of that, and Chip's gonna get into that in some detail. We've started to put together some capital project summaries, because we think it would be important to, at least on the large projects, always have a summary of where that project stands, what the next step is, what we see for future costs and the timing of those future costs. We've been looking at revenue and expenses, and I would say a lot of that is you got 4 members of the community that haven't all been through the budget process before, so we're educating ourselves about the budget process and trying to completely understand it, because we see in future years, the finance committee needs to be integrated into the whole process. And so we need to figure out the timing of when we need to have certain things done to support the select board. We started to work on future debt capacity, knowing we have big projects coming up, how much can we afford? And I think we won't be able to move forward with that really until we've got our arms around this year's budget a little bit more and understand this year's budget, how much capital can we afford in this year's budget? And then we'll talk about changes in the future in another slide. And then grants. We think it's important to put together a list of grants. I think Carol's created one, but more general common knowledge of what grants are out there, how they support the various projects, and keeping that up to speed. So with that, Chip, I'll turn it over to Chip.
Okay, my turn. I would like to say that Vika and all of you, but especially Vika, has done an incredible job. The individual documents that came our way, and, you know, they weren't spreadsheets, there's no formulas in them. They really were, quite these are just some of the variety of things that came our way. Budgets, these are reserve accounts, school budget, the ad hoc finance committee from last year, the finance committee guidelines, the draft capital plan there, that's Carol's grants. I think here's the big fire and rescue. That's the main thing, and it basically says accumulated depreciation. So that doesn't really help us, because what you want to know is what you're going to put in the fund. So we don't care what it's depreciated. And so what we did was I got a chance to, my favorite thing, as anyone knows, is Basecamp, or knows that. But as John's document says, the committee is using a collaborative software application called Basecamp. That not only improves our efficiency, but it will be a resource for future finance committees as a share. I use Basecamp. I've used it for 15 years to run a business, the piece of business that I run. It is online and collaborative, so everybody has the ability to get to it. It can run on your desktop, on your browser, on your mobile device. I think they even have a version that goes in your clock radio, which sprays it up in your ceiling in the middle of the night. You can use it then. It uses standard email, which is the good thing about it. You just see emails, they come and go. It is secure, it's invite only. It's a calendar. So basically there are tasks. The tasks are all run with email. You see those blue dots, that's how many emails have shown up for that particular item. You can have docs and files. That's the same as a shared drive that you might use. And it has a schedule. The schedule is probably like you can do an Outlook. One of the things that is good about it is it does a sequential arrival of every day. It sends out in the morning what's happened the day before. So you don't have to read all the emails. If you were a manager, you could just get up and look at what was happening. Any of the hyperblue links would take you directly to that task. So it's a pretty simple way. One of the nice things about it too is it's an easy way to onboard a new member. If somebody decides to join the finance committee, then they just slide into the seat. We don't send them a bunch of gazillion emails, and they see all the history. And it saves the history for the future. Basecamp I use has 15 years of things about files or artwork for files or that type of stuff. So it also has a global search, which links everything. And it's because I hate email. And I listen to discussions as in here, and it's not a criticism, but every time I come to one of these, it opens with, did you get that email? Did you get that? I didn't get it. Did you get that email? Did you get that email? Well, anyway, if you're on Basecamp, you would get that email. You have to physically disconnect yourself from the link to not get the emails anymore. If you want to go back and look at them, they're all there. You don't have to look at them. So this is our task list. And those blue dots are conversations we've had. We're creating a story. Spreadsheets are great, but they're really just a one-dimensional number. All the stuff you're working on is a story. And you want to capture that story and make it available for future people, so it doesn't reside in somebody's head. You know, what's that float? I don't know. This is the list we're working on now. These are items. It's the basic outline format, it's simple for people, all emails are linked to a task. I would be happy to take anyone online and show them. It has 16 million users, 75,000 organizations in 166 countries. And that's almost it for me. John?
Yeah, one thing, I've never used a collaborative software thing before, and Chip introduced it to the group, and it is very, very helpful. It's made our group much more efficient, so, and the learning curve is relatively quick.
And any of you would be welcome to visit it. We just send you an invite, and you just join the crowd.
So one of the main things we're focused on is the reserve accounts, and you guys will probably talk about that later tonight, and how much needs to go into those reserve accounts. What's the savings for each asset group? And we're looking at assets both as hard assets, like a fire truck or an ambulance or a plow truck for the town. And then we named them soft assets, but buildings. And we'll talk about some examples when we interviewed people and, you know, oh, this roof needs to be replaced at some point in time, but we don't collectively have that in a plan yet. And another thing, talk about fire trucks. It said, you know, should we bond, large or small? I think at one point in time, people thought $50,000 a year was being put aside for fire trucks. And maybe we're still putting the $50,000 aside into the reserve account, but the tank truck could have been replaced, should have been replaced prior to now. There's another truck that maybe needs to be replaced in the next 5 years. So they're both $500,000 a piece now. So what we want to help you figure out is, well, are you going to save for that? It would be great if you could, but certain assets might need to be bonded. So, you know, what's the bonding plan? With that, back to Chip.
So the asset worksheet, when we had we had reserve accounts, sheet with reserve accounts, we had a sheet with assets. And so I took I looked at the Pownell spreadsheet. The Pownell spreadsheet had the formulas in it, which were, I could just barely understand. And the key, I'm not kidding when I say that this one. And an asset worksheet's no good if nobody else can use it. If somebody develops an asset worksheet and falls overboard and nobody else knows what to do with it, it's not good. So the asset worksheet that I put together, very simple formulas for anyone to understand. There are 130, this goes up and down. Jay picked up a few the other day, assets that, you know, come and go, but there's basically 130 assets. That could include a road, but it's basically, so our job, the job of this asset worksheet is to tie the assets to the reserve accounts, to answer the question, how much do I need to put in the reserve account to maintain that asset? And again, simple formulas, as thinking about the future, online collaboration. This lives on the web, everyone can look at it. And there's one version rather than sending around spreadsheets, because we get the, here's the final spreadsheet. No, this is the final spreadsheet. No, this is the really final spreadsheet. And as an example today with that spreadsheet that you sent, I think it's the wrong one because it doesn't have formulas. So that's what can happen, but it lives up on the web. So anyone can use their spreadsheet. So this is a picture of the assets, a pie chart of the assets, and you can see half of them are 2% or under the total value of the town. It just means there's a lot of little stuff. And this is the scary part. This is the online asset work. This is a scrolling view of it. It's got on the left-hand side, you're all welcome to do this. I'll explain what's in there, but we don't want to go through it line by line. But this is each one of the items that existed on your asset worksheet. And on the left is the reserve account. on the blue hyperlink way over is the base camp. So if you're working on this, you can click that and go right to the base camp string and see what the story is. Sorry. Well, if you didn't absorb it the first time, probably did
Space
this
repetition
time.
learning.
Much clearer now.
But anyway, because it's just a quick explanation of what it is. So that's what it looks like. Basically, the yellow are places you input numbers. The gray is where there's a formula and it's going to derive a number for you. And we had, for instance, the year was put in service. What was the original asset cost? What was the estimate? John did this based on the depreciation schedule. We have no idea if those guys, the people that did that know what it was, or it's just a convenient straight line depreciation for a typical depreciating a backhoe. But anyway, so it's 20 years until you have to replace it. And then the spreadsheet says, okay, you need to replace it. Years until you replace it is 5 years. Again, these are the inputs. You put in what you have for for an estimate to replace it. If it's the original replacement call, that gets worked on by, it says it will take that, and then the years of how old is that that replacement estimate. Bottom line is on the end, you want to know how much spending you put in that for those 5 years until I need to replace it. That's a lot of fun. But anyway, but the other thing about as a working model is that every cell in here that does anything is tied to these two cells, which is the inflation rate and the investment rate. You have two things to consider. So you can move it. You can go 1.03 again. I didn't put in percentage. I put in a very simple. It's 1.04, so it's 4% inflation rate. If you change that, the whole spreadsheet changes. The investment rate is the money that's in the reserve, because it's assuming that it's got a certain amount of money in reserve, which is going to then accumulate at 3.5% for X number of years until you have to replace it. So you will have some money put away with it. So that is basically that. John?
Yes, so one thing in that last chart, when Chip was going through the details, there was one column that said, year of this estimate was created, and it showed like 2011, 2012, whatever. We need to get to the point where all of those are like 2024 or 2025. And so the asset list we started with hadn't been updated since 2023. So we still need to get some information from the town, hopefully from the town accountant, as to what we've purchased since 2023 that was purchased for reserve accounts, and add those to this asset list. And then we need to work on a process where we've got some good updates, but then it gets done annually, either by the department or by a committee. Herb and Mark did some work for the finance committee on the road repair plan. And, you know, they used to be the road committee, and they volunteered to do that. So we've got an update on the road repair plan. But that's an example of how it has to integrate into your process. You know, we get this done in, I don't know, November, December, early January. So we've got better information as you go through the budget schedule. Because we don't know, you know, it's people like Jeff or the guys in the fire department, they know what they need, so. And with that, Jake's got a few comments about a couple of the interviews we did with our man in the departments.
Well, we started out, John and I met with the fire department, and then I met with Jeff and his department a week and a half ago. And we came away from the fire department conversation with, they impressed very hard on the fact that they need a new $500,000 truck. Interestingly enough, because that new truck drives the need for a whole new building, part of the conversation was that the truck, because they're all custom built, could actually be built shorter. And with some adjustments into the existing building, might be made to fit. Something that should be further, looked at further, because before we hop on a $5 million new building, there may be ways to deal with some of the issues. Doesn't solve all the problems. So, in talking with Jeff, we went through the equipment list. We found a new item, which was a New Holland tractor with a lot of attachments, which we purchased last year apparently. I guessed at a price, I used my notes, but we'll need to get some more of that information. Older equipment, we have a little better idea about. And then there was a lot of equipment that was on the list that we had, which is no longer there, which includes a small road grader, bulldozer, a chipper, dump truck, pickup, and so forth. So part of this is trying to establish what we actually have for equipment and to try and create a rational depreciation schedule, or actually more an amortization schedule, so we'll have enough money when it comes up again to buy it, unless it's a $500,000 fire truck. You need, if you ordered it today, interestingly enough, you'd have to put a deposit down, but it wouldn't be built for over 2 years. So that you have a 2-year time frame in which to figure out whether you want to bond it, try and stretch to get the money out of the operating budget, or whatever. But there are a lot of, little things in this line that need to be understood and reviewed to allow the town to create a financing plan as to how it wants to be done. Whether it wants to go to reserve funds, whether it needs to be bonded, what's the time frame, and so forth. Which brings us to another issue, which is everybody has always seemed to think that you can just bond whatever you need. You just go bond it, call Maine Bond Bank up and we're done. And there are a few issues with that. One is state law says that any town is allowed to raise debt in the amount of up to 7.5% of its assessed value. The school district is allowed to do the same. However, in combination, you can only do 10%. Now, just not that you should even begin to think in those terms, but to put some numbers together, the assessed value of the town roughly is $330 million. So 7.5% of that gets us to $24.5 million roughly as a possible bonded debt. Currently, our bonded debt, the outstanding principal of our debt is around $1.3 million.
What was the first number, Jay? The total percent allowed?
Total percent allowed is, if you combine the school and the town, 10%. Individually, 7.5%.
So 300,
But you can't.
$330,000.
And 330 million is the town's, roughly the town's assessed value.
Right, so 10% is 330,000.
No,
I'm sorry, right, 33 million, 33 million.
it's the decimals that get you every time.
Yeah.
Okay, so $33 million.
And our current bonded debt is principal,
Principal, where are we? Principal,
One of the pages in the budget.
yeah, $1 million, okay, total is $1 million. Total unpaid debt is just under $2 million,
Of just the first,
That we have now.
as we exist now.
including the broadband.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. including broadband. And the school is at $1,285,000.
Oh,
Okay, that's it, which I'm treating these separately,
Yeah, okay.
just, but anyway. So, one of the things you want to keep in mind is, every $1 million you borrow is going to cost you plus or minus $70,000 a year.
Say it again.
$70,000 a year for every $1 million you bond.
That's based on the current interest.
That's based on a 5% loan for 25 years. Which is somewhere in the general ballpark. You know, if you shorten the loan down, then your payments go up because you got a shorter time to pay them off. If you go to a 30-year loan, you know, it cuts them down a little bit. The real issue is that you can only bond for useful life. In other words, if you're gonna buy a pickup truck, just like your friendly car dealer will allow you to borrow it for 6 years, or 5 years, whatever, that's how the bank feels about it. That's how, somewhere in the state of Maine in the law, there is a list of expected useful lives on everything.
So you said 70,000 a year for $1 million bonded on a 25-year basis.
On a 25-year basis, 5%.
Yes.
The interest rate currently is probably a tad high, but
Who knows what happens tomorrow?
we don't know. Things are crazy enough as they are.
Yep.
So the question that all this comes back to is, in a lot of ways, is how much can the town stand in terms of tax increases? And you can fiddle around with how you issue the debt. You can fiddle around with what you put into the reserve accounts. And fiddle's not a good word, that has certain derogatory sound to it. You can, as you're trying to figure out the best way to schedule how you're gonna raise the money, whether it goes into reserve accounts on an annual basis, whether it goes into a bond, you know, as the other way. We've actually looked at bonding like 5 million 3 years from now, 5 million, sort of out to 13 million as sort of a total. That might or might not work because when you issue a bond, it has to be for a specific project. You're not issuing bonds for, oh, we're gonna raise $5 million and we'll let you know what we're gonna spend it on later. It doesn't work that way. You have to let them know what you're raising the money on. So there are a lot of restrictions that go into this, and I think that, you know, among the things that the board needs to do is the board needs to get down through what we call major capital projects. I've got a little list of 6 or 7 of them somewhere, and decide what the priorities are and how important each of them is. And at that point, then you can start to figure out how you're gonna pay for them, because they total a lot more than we can afford to raise. Now, that does not include any grants. I mean, you know, God, the great God of grants is always out there with his hand in his pocket, unless you live in the state of Maine and suddenly the hand's no longer there. So I think that we have to think not in terms of what we can get. I mean, grants are wonderful. We should do everything we can to get what we can, but we shouldn't be assuming that we're gonna get. I mean, currently we have 2 earmarks from our government.
We did.
Yeah, they're going, I assume.
Sorry.
Are they going? Are they still here?
Depends on the vote tomorrow.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, but sort of the easy come, easy go, unfortunately. And if we had to, I mean, there are FEMA grants. How are they doing?
so far, we're doing good. We received our first check this week
Oh,
of
right.
$13,000, but hopefully the $800,000 check will come in a little quicker.
Okay.
But,
Good point.
You can't, you can't count it. It's just sort of, if it happens, great, it allows us to do more. If it doesn't happen, we have to be prepared to raise what we need for what we need to build and cover. So that's, is that enough gloom and doom?
I think that's really solid and appreciated information. Are you ready for questions at this point?
No, we got a few more to go.
Maybe we got about 5 more slides.
Let's keep going.
I think we can go faster.
These are just the,
Sorry,
Our 12 minutes is up.
these gray ones are some items that kind of showed up during discussions and.
Recent acquisitions,
For
yes.
instance, should they maintain a truck trailer boom for float
and
maintenance?
to be
These are what,
purchased there.
the town has or deeds?
This is talking about new stuff.
This is
This
some stuff that's been purchased and some stuff that's been proposed to be purchased but hasn't been
Yeah,
purchased.
this
Like the more for the school field. is not-
Assets.
Yeah, I mean, this is,
Discussion.
there are a couple of items that, like if the school is going to, I'm just gonna take 1 second.
Okay.
If the school is going to, if the town needs to do the mowing, then the town needs to buy them a mower. You know, and if the town wants to have, the floats hauled by an outside contractor,
We don't.
then we don't have to repair and spend a whole lot of money on some really old equipment. So those are things that need to be thought about, worked out, and sorry it took too long.
No problem.
A couple other things uncovered was the public safety, through various discussions, the roof on the public safety building, the furnace in the public safety building, the septic system is 40 years old. So these are things that aren't on the asset list that I've added to it. The town garage, the waste oil furnace, I guess, the salt shed wall is in repair, disrepair, and it's been downgraded by the insurance company because it's needs work, and a hot water heater, I can't say exactly what it is. Anyway, back to John.
Yeah, so Jay touched on it. We're in good shape going forward with, our debt's not high now, okay? And so when we look at, you saw the school budget last week, there's significant savings this year in the school budget. Reduced enrollment, that's not necessarily a great thing for the community versus long-term priorities, but from a cost standpoint, the enrollment saves a lot of money. But the retirement of the MSAD 51 debt is important, and that savings is there. And then they're starting to get increased tuition from revenue students. Okay, and then on the municipal side, you got retirement of the original Cumberland debt coming up in the next couple of years. Broadband revenue coming forward. And you've been talking about increasing fees, transfer station, et cetera. We had a conversation about if we're making an investment in the barge ramp at Bennett's, you know, should people that are barging pay some kind of an access fee to the town? Not a crazy idea, it makes it a little more expensive, but whatever. Municipal budget concern, I don't know whether you talked about the undesignated reserve funds yet in this budget cycle, or if you have an auditor's report back yet. But the last few years from the undesignated reserve fund, you've been taking 200,000, we've been taking 200,000, 250 fiscal year 24, 25, 250s in the fiscal year 26. Well, the first year we can't take that. That's a 6 to 8% tax increase if you do nothing else. So we have to be on top of that going forward. Next slide, Chip. I'm picking up some time here. So we're in a good period from capital's being freed up. So the next 5 to 10 years, knowing we have big projects, I think our collective view of the finance committee is we know we're gonna have to borrow large dollar amounts in the next few years for large capital projects. Our annual budgets should always build our capital reserve accounts as much as reasonable tax increases will allow. And then, you know, there's a lot of details we need to work through, like what are the priorities and how much do we really need for the 130 or the 150 assets that are there, and et cetera. But, large capital projects. The view of the finance committee is we need to have a current project summary, a quick overview of every large project, and I think I said it earlier, so that we know collectively what the timing is. When we have an estimate of the cost, we need to put that down on paper, and then we need to figure out how we're gonna fund that. And that's just a list of the big projects that are there, some of the big projects. Bond debt, Jay talked about it, we can borrow a lot of money. That doesn't mean we can afford to with reasonable tax increases. We've started to look at what's our borrowing capacity. Jay mentioned a $10 to $13 million number. Maybe, I mean, we're not totally confident of that. That's over the next 10 years. And I think to do that, it said that 30% of the total community budget, school and municipal, like if it's 4.2 million this year, 30% of that budget would have to be dedicated to capital, either reserve funds, capital spending, or bond payments. And I think historically we've been closer to 22, 23.
So what's the 30% number? Is that the committee's recommendation, or is that?
When we were playing with the capacity, that
Right.
we're not ready to say what it is, that we were at about a 30% of the total budget being used for capital to get to those kind of
13
numbers.
million? Is that based on 13 million? Is that where that?
No, that
Okay.
somehow I took this year's budget, and with the 795,000 that was in the reserves plus the bond payments, I got to it, that came out to 30%, and then I just went forward with that.
So it's a theoretical.
Yeah,
And you said we're currently,
Wow.
you're saying 30% is a theoretical, could do, but we're currently at,
I think last year was like 22, but don't hold me to that.
got it.
And could do is a function of how much you want to raise the taxes.
Okay.
Right.
So I think we have some open questions, I don't think we need to go through those, because you'll get to them, or we'll get to them in future discussions.
Yeah.
And then the last slide is we have a list of action items, which really just summarizes what we've been talking about. We're working on getting a high-quality asset list that helps us project what we need to, what our future capital spending is gonna be. We wanna put together a template, a snapshot of the status of large projects. We're gonna do some work on what's our fiscal capacity for bonding for capital projects. We want to pull together a list of all the grants and understand grants. And then we need to understand all the revenue sources, better understand the whole budget, so. I think the base camp thing, again, that we've been using has made the team pretty effective and pretty efficient. Again, we've only been doing it for 8 weeks.
Is that actually
So we
you guys?
started,
Is that you guys in the boat?
yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, we got rid, Jim Harley's driving.
Yeah.
No, but just to show you that the impossible can be done.
In an island car.
Not changing tires on
We
the
can
road.
do this. Okay, that's it.
So
So we're only over our 15 minutes by about 20.
it's a stellar,
So it's the budget.
stellar opening.
Yeah.
I'll just say thanks, and then I've got a bunch of questions. I'm gonna open it up to the board for questions and comments first. Anybody?
You still have your question? So Eliza Jane would like an explanation, and I think you could kind of use the savings account analogy for the undesignated fund, what you meant by that your taxes go up by 6% if we're not allocating 250,000.
Okay, so if you look at the budget package, the revenue is in there. Okay, and in the revenue, part of the revenue is use of undesignated fund reserves.
Think
It's
of it like a savings.
250,000.
Right.
Okay, so when the tax assessor goes to calculate taxes, he fills out a sheet, and you guys all need to look at that sheet. We'll look at that single page sheet, and he says, okay, here's how much money you need, and here's where it's coming from, and he subtracts the revenue from the funds needed, and you need to, so I think that number's, like if your budget's 4.2 million, with the 250 in there, taxes need to raise 3.7. So you need to raise that 3.7 million from a assessed value of 330 million, he calculates the millage, okay? So if that 250 isn't in the revenue, he doesn't need to raise 3.7 million, he needs to raise 3.95 million, so the millage went up by 250 divided by, the taxes went up a lot. So another way of thinking about it is 330 million. 1% of that is
Not me.
3,300,000.
bad example.
So,
For every $30,000, your budget goes up, your taxes are gonna go up 1%.
Every 30,000?
Is that right?
no, every 3
million. Oh, 1%.
30,000, no.
No, you're forgetting the millage rate now. You have to bounce out millage. A simpler way to do it, for the purpose of estimating for this conversation, is in the spreadsheet that just got sent out this morning, that is a live calculating spreadsheet. If you delete that 250, you go from a balance of expense and revenue to a expense exceeding revenue of, hold on, 6%. So if valuations stayed the same, by eliminating that 250, expenses now exceed revenues by 6%.
Yeah.
So it's a simpler, it doesn't deal with all the calculations that the auditors have to do with the audit, which gets us to the actual number that we can use for a undesignated fund balance. And I'm now going to say that everything I said was probably just wrong, but Herb's going to correct me.
Not at all.
Okay.
I had a follow-up for John, because in your talk, you said that in the context of raising everything we can for our reserves. So that $250,000 was budgeted but not spent, right? At the end of the year.
That's how it got, yeah.
So you've got a couple of ways you can use that. You can put it into the reserve, thereby lowering the amount we need to borrow for a project, and tie that to what Jay said. For $1 million, it costs us $1.75 million. So you get more for your money on those reserve projects by doing what these two guys said.
Kind of what we have been doing.
It is.
No, you've been taking that $250,000 and putting it and calling it revenue for the next year.
No, well, we've
And
been
then you
using
load-
it to fund the reserve account.
Correct.
So that
Some of
is
it.
a lot, well, all of, I mean,
We
Sitting
actually
in this
last year
chair, we
increased the capital
absolutely did
budget
that.
by that amount once we decided to
Exactly.
use that amount.
so I think that, yeah, that is a strategy we've been using, so.
In our third or fourth review last year, and we can look back at the minutes and correct me if I'm wrong here, but my remembrance is that once we knew that we could legally and advisedly use 250,000 of undesignated fund as revenue in the budget, we turned around and increased the capital, funding the capital accounts by that amount.
Do you have any idea where the undesignated fund stands for this year?
We won't know
No,
that
don't know that yet.
until the audit comes in. The audit's expected in the next few weeks.
And if you could, we've had different auditors, and that particular audit firm, I just can't follow that. I mean, they're hard to follow anyway, but I find that one impossible to understand.
Have you guys seen it?
That's the only one I've ever looked at.
So that auditor,
And I skipped all the stuff about the personnel costs.
Well, I just worry that it's,
That's
I mean, other ones I could understand and kind of connect back to reality, but that one, I don't know, I can't do it.
so, several months ago, the board had suggested having the audit do a presentation leading up to it. And so where it was left was to, when a finance committee was established, that maybe it would be wise to have the finance committee, some board members, to have the audit firm do some kind of a, presentation, or more or less just a conversation, having an idea from them how to understand it. And so that's something, now that there is an established committee, and now that we are in the audit process and are leading up to the new year, I'd be happy to make the connections to try to set something up, so then that way you have an opportunity to connect directly with the town auditors or the company that's doing the audit.
Yeah, and I would
Does that work?
suggest you have them do it for the finance committee, and whatever board members want to attend can.
Yeah.
But that way, I think I would try to attend, but I have gone through the, prior audits from when we became a town, and was able to follow the map. But on that one, and of course, we had a gap of several, during the pandemic, a couple years, we didn't have audits. It's a new firm that picked it up from there. So anyway, it would be helpful to understand that, because I think we've had some confusion even about the undesignated fund. But the other thing is our assessment. I don't remember where we started, but the overall value of our real estate on Shebig has increased pretty significantly, but our budget has sort of grown to absorb that rather than, putting the money in the bank, so to speak.
Well, the budget has grown to absorb that, both on the OpEx side, but also on the capital funding side. Operating expense. So valuation went up, so taxes collected went up, but instead of showing a huge surplus that was just undesignated, we spent that in the form of operating expense and in the form of funding capital accounts. And we've targeted some years a 0% tax increase, some years a 2% tax increase, some years a 4% tax increase in these latter days of the annual budget conversations, as I would call them. Mark?
Thank you, Bob. Thank you to the finance group. This is a great start on this budget. I'm really glad to see this. Back to the $250,000 that we asked the taxpayers to take out of undesignated fund balance last year. And to me, it was this simple. We had an operational budget which had increases in it. We had a capital improvement budget that we wanted to fund more in some places. The combination of those two was going to raise taxes. And if we didn't take the take $250,000 out, it probably would have raised taxes by about 8%, roughly. So that's what you're doing. You're asking the taxpayer, this is what we want you to consider approving for a total budget for next year, and this is why, and this is what it would do to taxes, and if we take this out, it will be, I think it ends up being like a 4% increase.
The other point, and you guys, I know Jay knows this, but the rest of the finance committee, you understand there's either a recommended or a mandated range by the state, and then Shabik gets selected to be at a narrower band within that range as a policy.
Yep,
Yeah,
yep,
okay.
yep.
Range of what?
So the undesignated fund happened, and we don't spend as much as we thought we were going to. And the state has a pretty strong recommendation, if not a mandate, that it has to live within no more than this, no less than this. And Shabik has opted to live within a narrower band than that state policy. I think the state is 4% and 13 or something like that. I don't
No,
know.
we're at 16 and
The town's 16 to 25.
Okay.
Yeah, Herb and I negotiated that on the boat one morning.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
the key,
Yes, sir.
also, please remember about having all that, the undesignated fund, part of that one is it creates the cash flow tools that you need to run the town.
Yes.
So that's why you have to have a range, and you have to have some money in that.
Yeah, it turns out you need money in the checking account.
And
Yeah.
early on, didn't we have to borrow money to operate initially?
We
What's
had-
that called? There's some name for it. We had to get money, we had to get like a cash,
Tax anticipation.
right.
Well, I don't think we ever did that.
I thought we did it in the very beginning.
We talked about it, and it
If
was
I
like,
may,
go
we
ahead.
actually took prepayment from at least one resident
Exactly right.
Oh,
of
okay.
taxes, and then the taxes were taken out in a period of 5 years.
So we've never done a tax anticipation.
I don't believe so.
We discussed it, but it got,
Doing it, but it's still, it's
right, yeah.
And even after that, before, we had a windfall because we got money to do the Hammerhead turnaround and didn't use it right away. So we ended up using that. But if I may,
Please.
what I was referring to when I was talking is article in the town meeting, the article that says, the explanation is it's $250,000. A transfer from undesignated fund balance is made to manage the fund balance and help lower the tax rate. So that goes directly to revenue, right?
And I
mean,
don't,
in any way, it goes right to revenue. So what my point was, that we shouldn't, that masks a task increase. And that
Sure.
money, based on what these two guys just said, that money would be better if we let the tax increase and put $200,000 into the reserve for balances.
In
yes.
our operation, we were putting in, because I recall the conversation. I mean, it may say that in the warrant article, but the
Which is
objective
what-
was to increase our allocation, which we did,
We did.
into the capital fund. And that, of course, impacted the taxes, so we were offsetting that. So it's just, to me, it's kind of a matter of semantics. The objective was to put more money in reserve accounts, and then we used we could have, like you said, done it directly into the reserve accounts as opposed to that. But to me, the outcome was the same. I guess one thing that I have a question about, because I think it's kind of the elephant in the room a little bit, is the cost of these large capital projects we have, just having had them rolling around in my head for some time. And I don't know if you guys have any estimates for those, like the Stone Pier and, the public safety building. So to me, that's kind of relevant. And I'm hearing, all I can tell you is from the engineers, you just hear it's, 5 times what it used to be kind of thing. So it's pretty scary, like the Stone Pier, 10 million didn't even sound like quite enough to do part of the project.
But take that number based on the comment that Jay made earlier. This is not a real number, but just if it was $10 million to do a major capital project, that's going to result in 70,000 times 10.
700,000.
Yes. I got out a calculator and did that calculation. 700,000. 700,000 a year increase, which I believe is something like a 15% tax increase, all other things being equal.
Sounds about right.
So, and that to me, that's
$700 per year.
That's a real number for the stone, I mean, that's a ballpark number for a very modest improvement at the stone pier.
So if we do everything that's in the scope that's been handed off to the consultant for 30% design,
Which is not much.
let's just pretend, well, let's raise it and flatten it and add parking and widen Wharf Road, basically. If that comes in at $10 million and we fund it all ourselves by bonding, that's a 15% tax increase, more or less. And that's every year. That's
The
year
increase
after
is-
year for the period of the bond.
Well,
No.
it's an increase, but the amount stays the same.
Yeah.
You're not gonna increase it 15% every year,
Right, but it's built, it's baked in.
but it's baked in.
Yeah. It's not spend it, taxes go up this year and they go down the next year.
Yeah, no, they stay at that level. And the other thing is that's only one of about 6 projects.
Correct.
Painfully,
It's on your list.
yes.
Just quickly for perspective, right out of the gate with the Cumberland secession debt, our annual payment was about $485, almost $500,000 per year for a 20-year bond.
And that rolls off when?
Well, as Jay would tell you, the
27, 28
payment,
years soon.
Jay, does the
Yeah.
payment decrease a little over time?
No,
It
it's a
doesn't.
flat rate. It's,
It decreases in the final year, right?
yeah,
Is it,
but again, yeah, for the first 29 and a half years, it stays the same.
Yeah, you pick
The
up,
last 6 months,
you
you
pick
get
up
a break.
$300,000 or
Looking for something to
$400,000
celebrate.
capacity when that rolls off.
Yeah.
And then we got the Axiom payments to
Well,
offset that, which we haven't taken yet, so.
but we have to be careful because before we could say that, what was it, you said $480,000?
Well, roughly.
480 doesn't mean, no, I'm sorry, I was gonna talk about interest rates, but that's a cash amount, so it does compare to the 700,000 in the example we were.
So my point was, for this little town right out of the gate, that was a really
Oh, yeah.
big payment to have on
Yeah,
our capital side right out of the gate.
yeah.
So we reached out to the tax assessor, you know, when we're doing these projections, one of the things you got 330 million is our tax base now, or our assessed value of our property that generates real estate tax. Well, if you had 4 growth permits a year, you know, the question to him was, how much growth are you seeing? You know, and do you have any history of that? Well, he's only been around for a year,
Right.
and he said, well, I couldn't find any history, but he came up with a number that I thought was too big. I think he said 1 or 2% growth. He wrote us a note back. You know, that would be $3 to $6 million if you used a $330 million base. So I think his number was too big, but he's starting to look at that. And he did say that he's getting good information from the current code officer on the building permits, so he can follow up with, you know,
A more finite.
reassessments in a more timely fashion. So,
Yeah, because if it's 4 growth permits at 200,000 per structure, that's one thing. If it's 2 million per structure, that's something different.
yeah, and he also mentioned that, that the work that was going on in Hope Island might generate some reasonable, nice increases in assessed value.
Yes, multiplied by
Oh, we
0.5.
only get half of that.
Right.
But also, wasn't Jackie adjusting, every year she was adjusting the valuation based on kind of some comparable state, and I thought she said by 10% or something, it was a pretty big number, that all of our valuations were going up equivalently.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so the valuation's been increasing, and, you know, technically, if we had a flat budget, then our tax rate would go down.
Right.
But, you know, in a way, I feel like it's been that differential that we haven't kind of captured and taken advantage of, because, you know, I think you know, maybe more discipline on our side to kind of not just grow with the valuation.
That's a state valuation, right, that we're talking
That
about?
she, no, this is what she uses on the tax calculation form. And it's what she bases our taxes on. So on your tax bill, it's the number that she uses for that. And she was, instead, because we haven't had a reval since I don't know when, she was just incrementing them equally. But the difference is if we get revaled, it's probably gonna be differential on different parts of the
Yeah, you'd
land.
argue that if it's done right, it's fairer to people. You know,
Right.
people whose property went up, are gonna pay more, people
Right.
whose property didn't, they
And
just
if
don't know as
Jackie's
much.
estimate was done well, then on an aggregate basis, the reval wouldn't change the aggregate that much up here, down there. But if that 10% per year she was using, or whatever that number was relatively accurate in the aggregate, then the actual reval would not result in a huge change in the overall collection of taxes.
And I think that was the goal, because the state, that's what the state wants.
That's, she operates, the tax
state
assessor
wants you
operates
to
in the
be-
tax cap.
You want your assessed value to be very close to 100%
Yep.
of full value. And if it falls below, I think it's 75%, if memory serves, then they want you to do something about it pretty quickly.
The
In other
other,
words, reevaluate it.
the other thing that we should consider is we've had a request for a circuit breaker type of program locally, like many of the communities around us have. And I do think we should consider that, even if it's 5 residents, because I think we have some individuals on the island that are finding even the current taxes hard to pay, and it's only gonna go in a more difficult direction. And since we've actually had a request, I think it's something we should contemplate. I don't know how it's set up in other towns. I don't know, what's the finance committee's opinion on that?
That's a great question.
I don't know a lot about it, but I know my mother did use that, and I think it comes out of the estate when they die.
The what?
They don't pay taxes, and then eventually it comes out of the estate when they die.
I think that varies from state to
I
state.
think
that's
in most
different.
communities, it's subsidized by the town.
Correct.
It's
Yeah.
Subsidized by other
Oh, it's
taxpayers.
absorbed by the town?
Yes.
Other tax.
Oh,
It differs from state to state. Yeah. Because yours was, I take it, your mom was in Massachusetts?
yeah.
Yeah, they're probably way more involved than we are here.
Well, they're dealing with a different situation.
But anyway, I think that's something we should consider. It maybe seems like a little thing, but I think for a few individuals, it's maybe not little.
Yeah.
So I think one thing that could be helpful, and this was hugely helpful, but if we all had a shared understanding of what the next steps are over the next month and a half. I mean, at the end of a certain number of weeks, we have to finalize the warrant. And to finalize the warrant, we have to have a final decision on what this board is recommending to the taxpayers at town meeting. To get to that final recommendation, there's more work to be done with you guys and with us all together to come up with that final number. So we're waiting on the audit, and we're waiting on the tax assessor, and those things are relatively known as to when they're coming in, and then we're waiting on this board to make some decisions about that recommendation, coincident with receiving that information to finalize a recommended budget from this board. Carol?
I think a big piece of missing information, though, is these large capital projects and some cost estimates. I mean, I think realistically, we can't expect the finance committee to get us completely caught up in time for this budget season, to then have us allocate enough in reserve funds to get on the right track. I think it's gonna be a longer process to get there. So I think what I'm hearing is, as much as we can possibly allocate for reserve funds is kind of where we should go. And maybe we shouldn't be so shy about incrementing the taxes
No.
a few more percent to do that because it's more expensive in the long run. Is that kind of the gist of what
Yeah.
I'm hearing?
Yes, it is.
So I think that's a message we need to get to the community.
Yes.
And I think one way to give people a reality check is to plug in some of these capital projects, like the public safety building, the stone pier, you know, maybe this barge project. I mean, there's a number of them, and since we have an engineer that's, you know, doing 5 projects for us now, we could probably get some ballpark numbers from them. So it seems like going through that exercise as part of this spring episode of like 10 million for the stone pier, you know, whatever. Cousins is, I think what we have in our reserve account for Cousins versus what, and I understand from at least her, that that account was for the replacement of that pier, 80% of the replacement.
Yeah.
And I don't think we have anywhere near enough money. And so,
Even without adding in sea level rise.
right, so I think we need to get kind of at least in the right ballpark and then kind of send that message to the community. Because I don't think we can just try to correct it ourselves, and I don't think we can do it by this budget season anyway. I think this is the multiple year plan.
No, you're exactly right, and I want to say, apologize, Bob, I was misunderstanding your spreadsheet, works fine. My bad. But you're exactly right, and that's why I made that pie chart for people. There's a lot of stuff, you'd be disappointed when you look at that asset list. There's a lot of deficiencies. And it's the little stuff under the hood, in the weeds, and it just adds up. And I think that you'll find that there are a lot, I mean, take the roads, for instance, if you decide to do a certain amount of roads, it adds a lot. So there are a lot of, the sum total of the deficiencies in that, I think, would change a fair amount. And I do think that you do have to approach it by saying, how much can you, there's a limit now,
Yeah.
to what you can, like, somebody bringing home a paycheck, what do they spend it on?
Yeah.
Well, and one thing that didn't dawn on me until I really got on the select board is, unlike every other community in Casco Bay, we have this side of the ocean, you know, this side of the bay to, you know, maintain, and the other side, almost every other community has a state pier, and Cliff just transferred their pier to the state. So the state, you know, state is taking care of all those repairs.
Let's do that.
So I think we have like we have like a double whammy, and to be frank, CTC is not paying any of those costs. And, you know, but at the same time, we're paying increased costs as islanders on the transportation side. I paid $1,400 for my annual ticket. If I lived on Long Island, it'd be $240. So I think it's not coming directly through taxes, but it's still a cost we have to bear. So I kind of feel like we need to have sort of a bigger conversation even about, because maybe we need to be asking for more money. I mean, solid waste is one thing, but the whole transportation system seems out of balance in terms of the cost allocation to me. Because I don't know how we're gonna pay all these costs. I don't know. And it seems like maybe it needs to be distributed differently. I mean, we talked to Chris Mayo about alternative strategies, and he was open to that at DOT. So I think it's worth a conversation. Because I don't see how this community can support 2 piers, the barge ramp on, our tax base is bigger than like Long, but not that much bigger. So I think, we don't, I don't know how sustainable it is.
So back to the conversation about what we've just now started, which is a long-term approach to capital planning versus this year's budget. I think this year, from a budgeting standpoint, from that work that we need to do in the next 6 weeks or so, to get to a budget we can recommend to town meeting, to some degree will follow the path that prior select boards have followed, which is keep tweaking it on what has to be spent, figure out what this board wants to recommend for an impact on taxes, whether this board wants to recommend a tax decrease, flat taxes, a 4% increase, whatever that number that this board comes up with is, and with that conversation, figure out how to properly or as best we can fund those capital accounts. And at the same time, start the conversation that Carol just alluded to, which is a longer term approach that says, here's what happens in the long haul with all these projects if we bond. Here's what happens if we fund our capital accounts on a more aggressive basis. And then somehow work the conversation of outside funding, grants, CDS, all those things into the conversation as well. So to Carol's point, we can't answer all these questions before we finalize this budget, but I think this conversation helps us get to a somewhat more informed way of approaching that conversation about what to do from a tax policy standpoint.
One thought. I'm just looking down the list of what I thought were your projects. And Stone Wharf obviously sticks out above the rest. And you might want to think possibly about how much you put into the Stone Wharf. You're gonna have to bond it anyway. So if you wanted to put less in there and more into someplace else, with a view that, I mean, these are the kind of things you gotta think about, is if you're gonna bond it, I mean, if you, fire truck, $500,000, you got probably 2.5 years to figure out how to get the money. You know, that's something that you could do in a reserve fund, possibly. You've got a new truck for the Public Works Department, I think, that they're looking forward to. You know, that's somewhere you guys need to think about that kind of, that balance as well.
And the other piece of it is making sure we have enough in, using the Stone Pier as an example, making sure we have enough money in there that when we do go out and ask for grant money, we can show that we've been serious about building up an investment so that grant makers say, oh, you're not asking us for everything, you put $1 million aside or $2 million aside or whatever it is.
Right.
That helped in the CDS conversation that was successful until Sunday. And who knows what happens tomorrow with that. But thank you, Dave. That's a really good point.
So,
Yeah, that was actually one of the questions we had on the slide, of a few questions that we could get answered, you know, outside of this meeting, but do we really need 300,000 for the Stone Pier, and if we do, why?
Right.
And so, you know, what would that target be?
Right.
To, you know, show we're prepared to go forward.
And before we go further, Mark, you had your hand up a while ago, and I meant to call on you, and then I started talking. Did you have something was it relative to the Stone Pier, or?
I think Jay, what I was gonna suggest, just like Jay said earlier, I would seriously think about a prioritized list to suggest to the community for target. And then very quickly, when we submitted the road information to the finance committee, we recommended, this is the only recommendation, of sustaining a 30% cost per mile, which is about, I forget what it was, 70,000 or?
Yeah, 67,000 a year.
Yes, and the reason we recommended that specifically was if you had a big washout in an area, we would have that reserve fund to do that repair.
So he's talking about a minimum balance of reserve cash.
And you said 30% per mile?
30% of a cost per mile, $240,000 or something like that.
We wrote it down.
And that's the reason we put that, that's the reason we put that in there,
Yeah.
thinking if we had a
number.
It's
a
there,
major
it's okay.
storm and it washed something out, we'd have 3 million at least.
I can assure you it's somewhere in base camp.
Somewhere, if you search for.
So it would cover the repair.
I think there are a lot of questions still out there. I think it would be good to come up with a list of questions that you guys have for the select board. It sounds like you have such a
Yeah, we
list.
have, there's a lot. Go ahead. I was gonna ask about the communication. There's a lot of questions about the asset list. Some of it's just a quick, somebody could do a 10-minute phone call just to kind of explain what's this, why do we have, there's various, but there are a bunch of questions. So what's the best way to communicate that? Is it through Vika? I mean, I think Vika could answer a lot of them quickly, but I don't want to, I don't know what's the best way to the board as a whole. Do you want to join the base camp? Do you want to go in there and look around and see what it is? Do you want to meet and go online and look at the reserve account? Do a live question about it? There's a couple of different ways we could do it.
So your first question, how to answer those questions about the assets, Vika, what's your take on that?
So the conversation around the assets, there's really has not been a good record of them historically. What you received is something for $250 a year. The auditors, basically based on their audit and based on the information that we have from our insurance, what we know is covered by insurance, they create this list. And so the reason that you don't have, the reason that you have fiscal year 2023 is because that came with the very last audit. We don't have fiscal year 24 audit, so they haven't taken the fiscal year 23 assets, looked at the fiscal 24 audit based on what things were paid for, and then the list from us and kind of combined it. So for that updated information, that is something that would come from me, and so I'm giving them a lot of information. Well, the bookkeeper is primarily giving them a lot of information right now, and so I'm giving them a list of the new things that we've purchased in the fiscal year 24, and then they incorporate that into that list.
So if they have specific questions about this asset or that asset,
Then that's questions directed to me, because the fiscal year 24 assets list won't come out until probably closer towards the end of spring, but you will need that information for ahead of that, so.
Okay.
and then on more broad-based questions, if you could direct those to, I would suggest Vika and the chair, and then we could figure out between the two of us how to get it in front of the whole board, or whether the two of us can answer that.
Yeah, so bombard me with more emails, I
And then
have
Carol.
plenty of them.
Yeah, no, I know.
Well, yeah, we've got a short-term situation here that we're dealing with as well,
Right.
but Carol, you had something to say?
Well, it seems like the departments should be able to maintain an asset list, and I was gonna ask Jeff, and he's back, so it seems reasonable that, Public Works would have an asset list and maintain it, and if you have holes in it now, they could fill those holes through Vika. And I would think, Jeff, if it was relative to the transfer station or other, even some Public Works, it seems like that's where it should reside, not come out of the audit report, because, it's kind of backwards. We're providing the information to the audit report, but I think and I think also things happen and equipment breaks, or some, or they'll say like, oh, actually, we haven't used it that much, it's got another good 5 years. So I think the department should be responsible for maintaining a list of assets. So you could parse out each one by department and get them involved in sort of vetting it and helping to maintain it. And I think that's kind of critical, because it should start with us, I think. Us as each, particularly on the municipal departments. I think the bigger projects are gonna have to come with some outside assistance on ballpark estimates for costs. But I think we can do better if we do it kind of in-house and go out from there. Do you think that's feasible?
Totally, we can, and again, you're not gonna inventory every nut and bolt.
Right.
But you say equipment that's maybe $1,000 or more, or 5,000, whatever number you
I
want.
would say 5 or 10, yeah.
Yeah, we can come up with that list. If a drill breaks, we're not gonna have that drill on the inventory, that just comes out of equipment budget that we're gonna buy during that year.
I mean, it should be capital equipment only, the conversation.
Yeah, capital equipment, and you mentioned a guideline, was it like $7,000 in the life of over 7 years, or
Yeah.
5,000 in 7 years, or something like that? But we could set that guideline to help narrow the list down.
But it seems like, yeah, that seems like it would be more efficient and
more accurate.
more accurate.
Yes, for certain one of those, but there are a lot of, maybe it would be helpful if I send you guys a
Yeah.
link to the asset list. Just go on and look at it, and just take a look at what it is. Have any of you, have anyone used, like with Excel Online, comments, that
Yeah.
process? So you've done that?
Yeah.
Okay, so questions could be asked and responded to. Because it's easier to, rather than put them on an email and send the email out and then get back an email and update those, if you get a running conversation. So you guys are comfortable with that, okay?
So you said you have like 130 assets, and are those are,
Capital.
like physical structures, like buildings, which,
things.
and then some are
Could be
equipment.
roads.
Some are things like trucks and plows, and
Right,
some are the gear that the fire department uses.
Everything that's tied to a capital account.
and
It could be cemetery.
okay,
It doesn't get down to like the root, or although it sounds like it's starting to with the presentation here. But most of the list right now doesn't get down to like the components of the facility.
right,
Like the roof and the furnace and
or
the setup.
the electricity.
Although we're getting there, that's the goal, right?
Well, I added it because it was mentioned in the discussion, so it's in there now as something to talk about.
Not 6 toilets, but definitely roof. I mean, that-
Well, and I know there's a grant program for both, I think it's the town and the school separately to access potential heat pumps. And I don't know the details of the program, except that there was sort of a double incentive. But I guess the question is, where are we in our lifespan of those assets, and do they need to be replaced? Because I've heard different things, so that's, that would be good to know before we jump on those programs. Because once if we apply for the grant and get the money, then we need to follow through. But I don't have a sense of like, are these at the end of their lifespan, or can we continue with the furnace, or should we replace it, that kind of thing?
What you really need is a relational database written for the town, because these spreadsheets are just one-dimensional. And all these have stories. You just mentioned, I need to know a story about that heat pump.
Well, I guess just knowing when, what its age is and where it is in its lifespan would be.
Right.
I mean, at least that would be some information. I think there may be some benefits besides, the operational cost of heat pumps. I don't know how to compare that, I don't know if we looked at that. So, I think it's even those kind of decisions should have a cost basis.
There's a lot.
And, a capital planning basis. And it seems like we should put the responsibility a bit on the departments, and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, to kind of make those requests, or, if you haven't made a request for capital, we're not gonna just buy it. It's gotta be in the plan.
Justified, right?
Yeah.
Now.
So,
Right, so
like-
like I requested an engineering study for the transfer station to look at the roof.
Yeah.
Look at are these beams going to collapse?
Those are the discussions that I've been trying to start having on the department level, so we have a general idea from the department when it comes to the budget. And so it's kind of a new process that is being established, and it only works as well as, the employees who are on top of that department and are maintaining a good record of the information within that department. So it really ultimately comes down to a domino effect of everyone working efficiently, and if everyone is efficient in those roles, then it works out great. If they're not, then there is a hole, and we end up with some voids in terms of keeping track and having an idea of how much should be set aside for each one.
Right, I think I had this conversation with Jay, maintenance is a huge issue. we're catching up on a lot of the maintenance issues, but with the policies and procedures we're putting in place, the long-term lifespan of a lot of these assets will be extended because they are now on a maintenance schedule. We're not fixing it when it breaks, we're maintaining it long before it does. And that's what we're trying to achieve at both the transfer station and public works. So you don't have a $100,000 backhoe you gotta go buy, hey, we put 30,000 into it, but now it will last another 5 years. And that's what we're striving for.
Like your house, if you don't paint it every 10 years, it's gonna cost you.
That's a good point, because I think that can go a lot of ways to extending the life of all this stuff. And if you just, it's a very important factor in that big spreadsheet. If you start increasing the lively of years by 1, 2, 3 years, it makes things go down.
The cost goes.
Yeah. What was your cost?
So do we want to try to come up with a plan and assignments or volunteers or whatever to, in some sort of way, develop intelligent estimates for the 7 or 8 capital projects that are hanging fire, that we don't have quotes on, but could talk to engineers about? Like, Stone Pier.
That's when you say we, yeah, should be looking down.
I know. Stones. Yeah. Stone Pier, Cousins Pier, barging, South Shore Drive, East Shore Drive, public safety building. Off the top of my head are the big ones that are hanging fire out there. You mentioned fire department, trucks.
And do you have a road, like a new road estimate?
I was wondering when you bring that up. Yeah, I think the paving project that is an ongoing project is gonna be forever. And I think that's one that's worth talking about as one of those major projects.
Yeah.
As when I was looking at this and trying to think about how to do it, it's a lot of work. And when you mention those things, those are huge projects.
Yeah.
And they're important projects too. I personally don't have, because I'm still working full-time and part-time, and some changes in what I'm doing, to have more time than just working on that asset stuff and what we've already put off. So I mean, I couldn't commit and say that I could help for that other than helping with some communication with it. I mean, I can do that fairly quickly, but the research, the legwork to do that kind of stuff, I think it's a room full of grad students. It's a lot of
I don't want to throw a monkey wrench into it too hard, but let's take the stone wall, for instance, and we want to put a number on it, right? A goal number, even a 10, 12 million. How do you come to a conclusion of how solid and accurate that number is when you haven't even put anything out for interest or bid?
It's a good guessing.
Well, because I think you don't know. In fact, that's what happened after the pandemic, is that the bids were coming in so much higher that people had to step back on their projects. So we don't know, but I think we have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
I can tell you, the Stone Pier is between 5 and 10 million,
Right.
based on what, 5 million is the low end, and that's not doing everything that we even talked about. It's partly just the cost of materials and
Yeah,
everything, but.
I would agree with that.
Right, so I think one of the things might be lowering our expectations on some of these projects. In terms of what we absolutely need versus what we'd like to have. And so that's kind of managing the community's expectations too. And I think kind of this exercise, if I understand you correctly, cheaper to put the money away than to borrow it. In terms of a tax impact.
Well, it's cheaper to put it away because you're not paying interest on
Right.
something you haven't spent it on yet.
Right.
Cheaper for the town,
Yeah.
not for the taxpayer necessarily.
Well, it is.
The same money.
should be. You're at 31%.
So,
No,
whereas.
cheaper for the town from the standpoint of comparing it as an interest earning thing versus an interest costing thing, but we're taking the money from the taxpayer sooner. So the taxpayers losing the opportunity cost
When you
of that.
borrow the money, you're doubling the cost.
I understand that, but it's happening later.
I guess where I was
It's
going
opportunity cost.
is sort of trying to educate the taxpayer about this issue.
Yeah.
Because I think not many people understand that, and they can't put, you know, the Stone Pier project into the context of their taxes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So that's
what they
where I-
want. They want real numbers,
Yeah.
how it's gonna affect them.
Right.
And to answer somebody's question, it's Mark's question actually, about how accurate can we be at this level of conversation? Take South Shore Drive as an example. We know very little even about what the strategy should be, could be down there long term. Therefore, we know even less about what the cost might be. But part of budgeting is guessing. Part of budgeting is making as intelligent of a guess as we can, analyzing the impact of those estimates. And the analysis of the impact might say, wait a minute, you can't do that. We might decide, for example, if it's $10 million for the Stone Pier, and we look at the tax impact of doing that with no earmarks, just bonding and what we have in capital accumulation. We might, as a community, say, there were 3 things we were gonna do at the Stone Pier, we can't afford to do all 3 of them at once. So what do we do first? Those are the kind of conversations that budget estimating can help us engage in. And the Stone Pier is probably a really good one to start with, because A, we're further down the road from a design standpoint with that, and B, it's the biggest ticket item out there at this point in time.
If it was me, I would firmly at some point recommend to the public, the taxpayers, what the priority list is in your opinion.
Yeah.
With costs, well, we need an idea of the cost of those different
Yeah, you
things.
have the numbers.
Well, with the Stone Pier, if we do a 30% design, we should be able to get a pretty
A
good
guesstimate.
estimate.
Yeah, and at that number of borrowing, for every $1 million you bond is $70,000 a year, that's a good thing to get
Good
up.
benchmark. Yep.
I think the sooner we get this out in the conversation with the town, the better, rather than wait till we have, towards.
Yeah, so last year before town meeting, there was a Saturday
Budget
event where the budgets were reviewed, right? And people came. And I'm
I think it was
assuming you
before. we
intend to do
finalized.
the same thing this year, sometime in May.
Is that on
Sounds
our
like a
schedule?
good idea.
I have to look. I
It's in
haven't
the
looked at
plan.
it.
I know it's in the plan to do that jointly with the school. And I think the intent was to have that conversation with the community before finalizing the warrant. Because if, we come in with a draft budget and there's more than 10 pitchforks and 5 torches at the front door, that says something about how good of a job we did. So yes, that needs to be done. And Carol, the firm you're referring to is GEI, I take it? Because they're
Well,
doing several of these projects.
They certainly they have like, what, 4 projects with
Yeah.
us right now?
I think asking for just some estimating guidance on that list of 8 or 9 projects, whether it's from somebody like GEI, or whether it's from a conversation of 3 or 4 of the people who have been involved in a lot of projects in the past. Again, budgeting is estimating. And at some point in time, you just have to pull out the dartboard and say, let's say $2 million for South Shore, let's say $10 million for the Stone Pier, let's say $500,000 for East Shore, whatever those numbers are. It's a guess, but it's a guess that allows us to take the conversation further down the road.
I guess just one thing for me is it sounds like maybe we shouldn't be so reticent to raise the taxes somewhat, to put some money away, but I feel that we're gonna take that strategy, being a little bit more aggressive, then I feel like we do need some kind of program for older people on fixed incomes,
Yeah.
like the other communities have, so that we can kind of put them in place at the same time.
Yeah, I think that'll calm a lot of,
Well, it won't calm seasonal residents, and I
No,
think that,
will not.
be prepared. It's-
So does a circuit breaker
yeah.
can the select board draft a circuit breaker program and vote to put it on the warrant, and then town meeting decides, or are there state
I think it's-
benchmarks we have to hit and
I
learn?
think it's local, I think Yarmouth, Cumberland, Dale
I'd have
have
to
them,
look
and I
into it.
think we
I'm
can find
I'm
out
not-
from them.
Familiar enough with it to give you.
And
any
maybe circuit breaker is not the right term, but it's basically to help people on fixed incomes whose taxes, you know, the state had that program for a year.
Yeah.
Where we all are gonna just hold our taxes steady. That would have been interesting. And of course, then they realized they couldn't afford
I
that.
think they were off by an order of magnitude on their estimate before they approved that.
But if we would
But
want
it
to
would
budget,
be-
we would
it
want
would
to cite
be-
that.
It would be an income eligible program.
Yes.
Basically, I think there are municipal programs
Right,
that are funded within the
I
municipality.
think so.
The state doesn't have anything to do with it, you're not
You're
affecting.
subsidizing.
The voters are deciding that they want to subsidize a certain part.
Yeah.
And that's doable.
The other question I would raise as we begin to think about it, so A, we need to include the impact of that at the income level, or I'm not sure whether we record it at income or expense, but we need to account for it in the budget.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I would also ask us to consider, given the nature of our community, the difference between qualifying for such a program based on income versus income and some sort of means testing. So if you make $30,000 a year from Social Security, but you own a $1.5 million house and you've got $2 million in investment assets, that's different than if you make the same amount of Social Security and you don't have $2 million in assets. And how do you, if it's just income based, then we're gonna wind up with some people who have a lot of wherewithal getting their taxes reduced.
The easiest thing to do is to ride the coattails of some state program that people are already vetted through and already taking advantage of.
It works, yeah.
And it,
Don't put it on yourself to.
Do that.
but I think if someone has a valuable property, but their income is low, it's meant to protect them.
Correct.
You know, I think that's the point, but I think there are plenty of other programs out there that we could look at to see how they
Yeah,
do.
and it's the retirement investments that I'm more concerned about.
Well, I don't know.
Well, theoretically, those retirement investments would be creating income for on top of the Social Security, which then they.
Depending on how they're, yeah.
That's if Social Security continues. And I'm serious about that. I'm very
Yeah.
worried about Social Security and all the other.
So do we want to take on the task of trying to design a circuit breaker program?
I'll take on the task by asking other communities what they're doing, because I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel.
Great. And the goal would be to try to get this on this year's warrant.
Well, if our strategy is to adopt this idea of, you know, maybe being a little more aggressive, which I think is a good
It's time to do it.
practice, then I think it would be smart to do them simultaneously.
Yes, yes.
If we can, yeah.
And I mean, it probably takes a while for people to engage in that program. We have the homestead exemption tax ourselves, but that's the only local program we have.
Very quickly, I know you all already know this, and I agree with the goal of being more aggressive with targeting capital reserve funds, by the way. But if that means that you're going to be increasing the capital side of the budget, of course, like you will, and you're going to ask the taxpayers to take X amount of $100,000 to $400,000 out of the fund balance, I would just make sure that you're being as transparent as you can to the taxpayers, because that's also their money left over.
Yep. Thank you. Productive conversation. Eliza, do you have something?
Dean nods here.
Yeah.
And really appreciative of the experience from the select board and the wisdom here. I'm just gonna tell you all, never had a car payment.
Oh.
I've never had a car payment because I've always invested and saved. And so I really appreciate hearing what needs to be done. But yes, these are very uncertain times and we don't know what's gonna happen tomorrow. Or what will happen, especially not just for year-round people, but people who have second homes out here, how uncertainty with our country right now is gonna impact. So while I absolutely agree in this thinking that we need to get more money saved up in all of these accounts, and how important it is to be transparent. I see people being on board, but it seems that we also have to be ready to pivot if we have a big recession, or if we have some big financial changes that are happening. So I think we need to be sensitive to that as well. So I'm all for everything that I'm hearing here. I want to say it's good to be here. I'm looking forward to learning, but realizing that it's going to take a tremendous effort to get the community on board with the impact on taxes, because it has a tremendous impact on what we can do for infrastructure on the island. So those numbers Jay, are wonderful to hear, and I think educating the community because I still hear people say, oh, we want all these big, wonderful things, but not understanding the cost every year in those taxes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So going through the whole year of hearing people with increased fees at the transfer station and all the personal input, I just broke it down simply for them. We can increase taxes, we can increase fees, or we can decrease services. Which one of the three would you like? Because it can't continue the way it's going. You have three choices. And once they heard it point blank, like, oh, okay, yes, I can not grumble and take the can. It's just, that's the way it is.
So what they vote for?
Yeah, but they vote for, what's the tax?
They pay fees.
Pay fees, so.
They went around the back and dumped it.
Yeah, right, out in the woods.
I have a comment.
Yes.
I think this has been a really valuable conversation. Looking at the time, there is still a whole budget discussion that is supposed to take place. So I think the board needs to kind of decide whether they want to wrap this up, continue it, whether you still want to talk about the entire budget, or where things stand, because I'm wearing out.
So I would offer that where we currently are with the last approach that we took to capital funding and with the original inputted numbers for contributions to nonprofits, and knowing that we don't yet have the information from the county, Cumberland, the tax assessor, and the auditors, I would personally suggest that we digest what we have and we go to work on some of these questions, and then we come back to our next budget meeting ready to vote on decisions in terms of the recommendation of this board on those topics, specifically capital and nonprofits. And then finalize once we have the information from audit and the tax assessor's information as best it can be developed in the right time frame relative to taxpayers. Carol.
Well, I guess what would be helpful it's mid-March now. It would be helpful to kind of have, and maybe we have it, but I don't have it in my head, kind of what the schedule is. Like, are we trying to hit a final warrant? Usually you try to do that in early May.
Yeah, so there is a calendar that was shared with you guys that Chris had done. We can reshare it, but what the board has is, they basically have, there's one discussion On April 15th, there is a joint discussion with the school and the town. And then on the 16th is supposed to be the discussion for, I'm sorry, on the 9th is the select board is
9th of
supposed to have.
April?
April 9th, yes. There's supposed to be a fourth budget discussion, which as far as numbers, we've kind of not done that. It's just been budget discussion. And so where we stand right now, on April 9th, there is another budget discussion lined up. On the 15th, there is a joint one. And then the final budget, which is expected to be voted on as of right now, we have scheduled for May 14th. And then that's kind of our deadline where I need to have that budget warrant in front of you for a signature. So there are, several weeks where there's still a lot of flexibility to move things around. I think where you currently stand, there's minimal numbers on the departmental expense budgets that I think would need to be adjusted. But it's more or less kind of, I think, the capital and determining where you'd be.
One correction, we did via email reschedule that 9th meeting, April 9. That no longer exists.
Okay.
Okay.
And we moved it to the 16th. So that
That's right, before, yeah, okay, yeah, so I apologize.
Yeah.
April
We did move
16th.
it to there.
So yeah, the 15th and the 16th, that's right.
And do we have a budget presentation to the community date?
So that, there is no date set for a budget presentation. I would recommend that if that is something that you want to do, you do it between like the week of this, April 14th, or in the week of April 21st or the 28th. So after you have a generally pretty comfortable, good understanding of where you stand with the budget, have a presentation, and then that will still allow you some flexibility to potentially make some changes if you need to before the final budget has to be signed.
Would that be school and town? Is that how we did it?
I think it would be good to do it with, I think as good as the conversation, in my opinion, went, the few minutes that the boards met, I think it would be helpful, and I think it would be well.
And I think, I don't know if you're willing, but I think if the finance committee also presented at that meeting, I know it's a lot of stuff, but I think what you went through tonight was, or at least this whole concept that you explained about how to do the capital planning and kind of what you're grappling with, so I think the community has a better understanding.
I would suggest doing that meeting
Separately?
I would have the presentation, just a joint budget presentation by the select board and the school board,
Okay.
with finance committee being, the special presenter. And maybe do it on like a Saturday morning or something like that, coffee and some donuts or cookies, and really try to bring the community here to have a good outcome and to try to, not that I want to be here on a Saturday morning, but I think that would be a good time to be able to capture a good crowd.
Yeah, I think it's pretty important to kind of get that message out, what you guys are doing. So I think you or the committee, you can decide when it works for you.
Well, I think we're talking about a joint presentation,
Wow.
community workshop, budget committee, select board, school committee, so I think all.
No, I think Vic is saying do that separately. Finance committee, it would be.
Separate?
No, I'm suggesting do it all at the
once?
same
Oh,
time,
okay.
but do it on like a Saturday morning
Well,
or
I
something,
agree.
so more people can, and
Yeah.
have the select board and the school board present the budget, and then finance committee maybe
Yeah.
step in and, explain a lot of this information that then can connect. how,
Explain.
I think a lot of people would come out to it,
Yes.
I think.
Eliza, you had something?
And thinking about the fact that when we have a meeting, our people on the island come, but this is information that has such ramifications for seasonal people. So if the finance committee's presentation was in the form of a slideshow that gave that information so that people could look at it, so when people have questions about why are taxes going up, or why is this being impacted in that way, if the information, I'm still trying to digest so much of what you said, being able to have that in a slideshow that could be on the town website would be really valuable to reinforce that message to the community that isn't able to come on Saturday.
And also, that is a workshop that we would want to have both an agenda and a packet for.
Yeah.
So the current draft of the joint budget between the school and the town, and a derivative of the presentation that was given tonight, to have all those things up at least a week in advance, to give people time to digest, build up their questions, that kind of thing. So David and then Jim.
I just wanted to thank the Finance Committee, and I really think that the creation of this committee was one of the smartest things that we've done in the recent years. And seriously, and the depth and breadth of the information that the committee has put together so far, I think is incredible, and is gonna go a long way to making us successful in this effort.
Some guy kept bringing it up over and over again. I can't remember who that was.
It might have been you, I didn't hear.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Mark.
David.
Chip, yes.
Yeah, I did have did you have a date, Vika? You were saying a Saturday?
She was suggesting the 19th or the 26th,
Of
April.
April.
And that
19th
fits,
is the end of school vacation.
How about the 26th?
Yeah, because isn't that school vacation the week
I
of
think so,
19th?
yeah, Saturday the
In the morning.
26th, that would give, that would, what it would allow is for, if the select board had any
Yeah,
suggestions.
I'm away the 19th
26th?
and the 26th.
Don't you need
But
that?
I'm not capital discussion.
Yes, we've got,
We're away.
It'd be like at what, 9 AM or?
yeah, we just talked about that. We've got several more meetings
I
scheduled
heard
for it.
school down and budget number 4, I didn't hear a separate capital discussion.
Yeah, I didn't.
Is there?
There was already,
We
It
haven't,
was supposed to be last week, it was on the agenda, but it didn't happen, right?
the capital will get discussed in that time frame. That doesn't have any impact on whether we meet on the 26th. The 26th is pushing up against the time by which we need to finalize the warrant. So we can't push it any later than that.
5 and 14, 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
it
later.
could be on
Could be the
May
first weekend.
3rd.
So will the 16th include capital, if I may?
That was the plan, yes.
Thank you.
There's also May 3rd,
Yeah, I mean, we could do, I kind of think May 3rd
closer
is a
to,
month from town meeting. I think that might be,
Okay.
I think we need to.
If it was May 3rd,
I might be away then.
Oh, well, then, no.
and my concern about May 3rd is if we walk away from that meeting with the desire to make changes, do we have time to do that and still get the warrant put together rationally?
no.
The 26th feels pretty good to me. I know, Chip, you're not gonna be around, but I don't think we're gonna find a date when everybody's here.
Who's gonna put our presentation together?
It'll be on,
This would actually, would need to do with
Yeah, the
confirmation.
19th.
Correct.
But you're thinking
I
April
can, Richard
26th?
can run the slides, I can give him the slides, he can run.
yeah, base camp.
Huh? Right?
Yeah, oh, I could run.
Base
slides,
camp can do it
sure.
automatically.
You what?
Oh, yeah, no, sure.
So April 26th, subject to confirmation with the school committee, we certainly want to involve them in this conversation of scheduling as well.
In the morning.
But tentatively, 26, 9 to 11, I think 2 hours is pretty maximal for attention spans.
Yeah,
Make sense?
on a Saturday morning, yeah.
Donuts at 8:30.
So in 60 seconds or less, can somebody summarize the major things you think this finance committee should be helping to communicate?
I think sort of trying to get a handle on our large-scale projects and estimated costs. I think Jay's, explain it to the community what you're doing on all the assets, even the little pie chart, like how much little things there are, they all add up, like you say. And then Jay's kind of understandable description of, bonding versus paying ahead, kind of the differences. And I think the bottom line is we have to, and also kind of what our capacity is to bond, because we're well under it. I think we have been maybe fiscally conservative to our, to a fault perhaps, in terms of, kind of planning for the future. And so I think it's, I can write down some bullet points, but I think the asset list is kind of it's our responsibility now, being in VICA and the departments, to kind of help flush that out. And, maybe all the lifespans are not correct and stuff, but we can revise those. I think getting a ballpark handle on the big capital projects, even if they're really numbers out of the sky, but at least we know they're in the right realm, would be helpful just to get an order of magnitude idea of where we're going. And then explaining to people, because I just remember when the Stone Pier project came in at 18 million, and people were like, oh, great, and I'm like, it like made me gag, and I thought, yeah, it's because people have no idea what that means and maybe even a demonstration, like you were saying, John, about what an incremental difference means in terms of your tax rate, just hypothetically. I think that's helpful for people to ground themselves in what these costs mean for them. And, we maybe also, I don't know if we have time, but one thing we were gonna do with the finance committee before was, how is our tax rate and our sort of budget fared relative to other communities in the area? Because I think we've probably kept a lid on the taxes much better than most of the surrounding communities, except for Long Island, who's like, Long Island
themselves.
Yeah, and Long Island is using Shabig's budget, school budget, to justify their increases in their school budget. That's how they're doing it. So they sent me the presentation, and it's like, well, see, Shabig's going up this much, and we're only doing this. So Long Island is pretty, they're not a good comparison, but we can compare them. But I think the other part is, remember why we seceded, it was to survive, and had we not, we probably, would have tax, like we could take.
Taxes would be way higher.
Yeah.
Right, so I think that's an important thing to remember. It may feel pretty rough, but at the same time,
It's true.
it could have been a lot worse.
John, I would suggest that if you take the bonding versus investing approach in the conversation that you took earlier, and flesh that out with actual estimates of those 10 or 12 major capital projects, and then took one of them and said, here's the impact on your taxes if we spend 10 million on this, here's the impact if we spend 4 million on this. I think that in 30 minutes, at most, maybe even 20, of a presentation, gives people a lot to chew on. And I would do it as presentation from town, presentation from school, or however we do that, presentation from capital, and then questions afterward, not questions during. That would be my suggestion on how to format it, because the questions can.
Redirect the presentation.
Correct, yes. So that work, so you're gonna talk to Aaron about whether the 26th works for you?
Yeah, I'll email the school first thing in the morning.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah,
Well,
Jim.
no, I agree with that. I think if you get in the weeds on the assets, you can be talking about
correct.
trucks for hours. So, and that, while they're important, and they're structurally important, this seesaw, whoa! So that's what you should talk about. I agree. I just want to get.
Where are you going?
What?
Where are you going?
AirPods back and forth.
I mean, I
If it was someplace more interesting, I was going to suggest we come with you and have a meeting there.
Looks like that picture of Putin and.
So I haven't delivered on my promise to have a community conversation around our survey of priorities or whatever. And really, it's that shared thing where your capacity is kind of low and not everything is working, so I'm walking around pretty well these days. But I'd like to, now I'm gonna schedule the community conversation based on that survey of what are the priorities for the town. It was really encouraging, some good information, the community spoke about how they would rank the priorities, and it was right on target with where we were as a select board. I think giving that feedback to the community and receiving information is gonna be a good way to set up some of the questions that will need to be addressed in this budget, so now I'll do that.
Before the 26th or
Oh,
after?
yeah.
Before the 26th, okay, good.
Oh, yeah.
Chip?
And I would also, I mean, one thing I do have time to do, and I know I can do it well, is communicating things. So as you guys have things to communicate, you know, I can work with you at however you want
Gonna
to.
get
That
the whole
could
island
be.
of Van Camp.
Do I?
The whole island, standing up there.
Base camp, base
Oh, I
camp.
said that.
I like to
Base
hear.
camp, something different, yeah.
As a for instance, those slides, you guys want slides and you want them on the they can
Yeah.
turn into a little movie.
Yep.
And, you know, so you can do stuff like that, so.
Yep.
They need help with electronic.
Yeah, how many shares of base camp do you own?
I don't, I honestly don't, I don't,
He's working on
Did
it.
Elon own it?
Is there,
Does Elon own it? I need to know.
Not yet,
Not yet.
no, they're actually, it was an amazing story, but anyway. That's how Apple designed the iPhone,
April 15th.
April.
with Basecamp.
So where
Oh,
do we
okay.
stand
Can you
in
not
terms
do
of?
that?
So if you guys have information needs, you should.
Sorry, can we, Eliza, please,
Yes.
if we can try to keep this has been great, but let's try to keep a lid on it. Mika's trying to get us to wrap up.
Okay.
Does anybody have any final questions or comments?
Well, I was just gonna say, if the finance committee has specific information needs, one of which they directed to me, which then I thought you and Vika picked up, which I don't know if you guys, it was on these large infrastructure projects, right? Was it?
Yeah.
So you and Vika had said you would come up with that, I
With,
thought,
oh,
right? Or
Well,
maybe,
we had a meeting
oh, you
and
did,
went through the project
okay.
and roughed out short pictures.
So do you have any more information needs from the town?
Just a little.
Yeah, what are your estimates on all the costs of all this project?
Yeah.
so we could,
And priority, and what's your?
Yeah, and your priorities.
Carol and Bob have spent the most hours over the last couple of years of the people who are currently on this board, working on conversations with engineers on these major capital projects. One approach would be for you and I to sit down and go through the 10 and throw a number at it. A more educated approach would be to talk to the engineer involved, GEI, on 3 or 4 of them, and come up with a more informed estimate. It's budgeting, so Carol, do you have any thoughts on how we should go about that?
I think you and I can figure that out.
Okay.
But I think we need to get you some ballpark numbers so we can
Okay,
do that part of it.
we'll do that in the, I don't know what your schedule looks like in the next week or so.
Yeah.
And you guys think you have a common priority in the projects, like Stone Pier's #1 and?
Don't know. We can ask,
Yeah, we can poll the board.
The
You
survey,
got the list
yes.
I just gave you.
I mean, the survey.
Survey.
Some of that, but some of the stuff.
You could base it.
Yeah,
Probably time-wise, urgency is the stone pier.
we also prioritized a lot of those things when we had our group planning session last fall. We can look back at those notes.
The beer garden is the priority.
Okay,
Thank
good?
you, Vika.
okay, so we're gonna call the workshop
And-
closed at
and-
7:00 PM.